Before dawn, a tense calm over Iran's southwestern skies was shattered. Air defenses roared to life, radars flaring and missile batteries tracking a single object that Tehran described as a hostile reconnaissance drone. Within moments, Iranian forces said fighters and interceptors locked on and blasted the craft out of the sky, a rapid public demonstration of the country's growing air defense posture and the opening note of a brief but highly charged day across the Gulf. Iran's army put the event in stark, unambiguous terms, saying the interception was carried out by its integrated air defense network operating under the Joint Air Defense Command. Officials described the system as one that keeps the country's airspace under constant layered surveillance and said the drone had been detected, tracked, and neutralized roughly an hour before they formally announced the action. That phrasing was designed to underscore 2 points. First, that Iran can see and respond to threats rapidly, and second, that Tehran intends to make those defensive steps visible as a signal to rivals and to domestic audiences alike. The military's public relations account was amplified by senior officers and spokespeople who framed the interception as part of a continuing defensive campaign. Mohammad Akraminia, speaking for the Army, stressed upgrades to radar coverage, targeting systems, and the broader defense infrastructure. He said those improvements have dramatically improved both detection and rapid response capabilities, a claim meant to project technological confidence and operational maturity in an atmosphere of repeated aerial encounters over recent weeks. Akraminia went further, linking the heightened alert to a broader diplomatic and strategic warning. He said the countries supporting U.S. pressure campaigns and sanctions could face strategic pressure from Iran across the region, particularly around the Strait of Hormuz. In his words, recent confrontations had done more to hand test Iran's defenses. They had exposed not only Iran's defenses' strength, but also its expanding offensive reach. That is the kind of rhetoric that hardens lines and widens the aperture of confrontation, the language of deterrence that can also feed escalation. The incident is not an isolated flare. Iran's authorities and state-affiliated media have repeatedly reported heightened aerial activity in recent weeks. On April 24, air defenses were reportedly activated over Tehran and several other cities after the detection of multiple drones. Iranian outlets described explosions tied to interceptor fire and identified some of the unmanned aerial vehicles as orbiter models, small reconnaissance, or loitering drones produced by the Israeli company Aeronautics. Tehran has said both the regular army and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have engaged dozens of drones in recent weeks, portraying a persistent aerial contest that officials linked to the broader conflict that escalated last February. That contest in the sky has been mirrored by a parallel standoff at sea. Alongside the military messaging about missiles and radars came a sharper legal and political warning aimed squarely at international shipping. In remarks carried by Iran's official news agency, Mohammad Akraminia cautioned that countries complying with U.S. sanctions on Tehran would encounter difficulties transiting the Strait of Hormuz. He said Iran has introduced a new legal and security system for vessels crossing the waterway, requiring prior coordination with Iranian authorities, and insisted the measure is already in force and designed to yield economic, security, and political benefits for Iran. That direction elevates the stakes. The Strait of Hormuz is not a remote, symbolic line on a map. It is one of the most strategically sensitive energy corridors in the world. A significant share of global oil exports and large volumes of liquefied natural gas and other commodities pass through that narrow channel every day. Any formal or informal constriction, any additional paperwork, or a perceived imposition of fees or inspections can ripple through regional trade and global energy markets almost immediately. The warning followed reports that the United States and Bahrain had drafted a UN Security Council resolution urging Iran to lift restrictions on shipping through the strait. Diplomatic sources also said Russia has signaled readiness to veto such a proposal, setting the stage for yet another geopolitical confrontation among external powers over control and influence in a region whose waters are already crowded with competing navies and commercial interests. Iran's diplomatic line was reinforced by its foreign ministry. Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Gharibabadi declared bluntly on social media what Iran sees as the red line. Only Iran has the authority to maintain security in the Strait of Hormuz, he said, stressing that Tehran would not tolerate what it described as interference by extra-regional powers. That statement was intended to draw a doctrinal distinction between local sovereignty and outside intervention, and to frame any foreign naval presence as an act of intrusion rather than protection. France and the United Kingdom have been central in that debate over maritime security. Western officials and commentators have discussed options, including expanded naval patrols and ad hoc coalitions aimed at protecting freedom of navigation. French plans reportedly envisioned a forward deployment of the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle and its escort group to the Red Sea and nearby waters, while Britain spoke of readying a warship to help safeguard shipping lanes. The French president addressed mounting speculation directly, noting differences between grounding a carrier strike and participating in a broader cooperative initiative with partners. He said, in part, there has never been and there was never any question of a French or franc. Oh, British deployment, we are standing ready. From the beginning, we have been saying one very simple thing: freedom of navigation and all blockades wherever they come from and whatever they may be, reject any tolls wherever they come from and allow freedom of navigation. The tone of that remark, a mix of reassurance and caution, illustrated the tightrope European leaders are walking, signaling resolve to protect commercial traffic without provoking a direct military collision with Tehran. Tehran's response to those discussions was predictably stern. An Iranian official accused Western powers of militarizing one of the world's most important energy corridors under the guise of protecting shipping routes, and argued that countries supporting military pressure and blockades against Iran could not plausibly claim to be neutral guarantors of maritime security. He insisted that the Strait of Hormuz is not common property for foreign powers, but a sensitive regional waterway adjacent to coastal states where Iran has sovereign rights under international law. That framing appeals to nationalist sentiment at home and to a familiar legal argument about coastal state rights, even as it raises the prospect that Iran will enforce those rights in ways that neighbors and trading partners find provocative. Against that backdrop, Tehran has also linked naval measures to the broader campaign of sanctions and diplomatic pressure. Iranian officials said they tightened controls after Washington announced a blockade targeting Iranian vessels and ports. Whether as a legal countermeasure or a bargaining chip, the step represents a calibrated intensification, not a full naval closure, but a rule change that shifts the transactional calculus for commercial operators and states who must now weigh the costs, delays, and potential host state friction involved in transit. Energy markets have already shown sensitivity to this kind of rhetoric and action. Traders and analysts watch the stray as closely as they do any political headline. Even the hint that tankers may be diverted, insurance premiums might spike, or cargoes could be delayed for additional inspections can push crude prices higher and add a premium to shipping costs. For producing and consuming countries alike, the prospect of even temporary disruption is enough to prompt contingency planning. Beyond markets, the more consequential risk is political and military escalation. When submarines, frigates, and aircraft from multiple states are operating in proximity, the chances for miscalculation increase. A mistaken identification, a misfired interceptor, or a close encounter at sea can turn words into actions with frightening speed. That is why much of the international discussion has focused on de-escalation mechanisms, hotlines, rules of the road, agreed notification procedures, and transparent coordination that can limit the chance of accidental clashes. Diplomacy has tried to thread that needle. European initiatives have aimed to build cooperative frameworks, ad hoc missions, information sharing platforms, and multilateral engagement designed to reopen shipping routes while preserving Iran's dignity and sovereignty. At the same time, Tehran's insistence on what it calls coordinated passage and prior notification reflects not only security concerns, but also a political calculation. By asserting control over how ships transit adjacent waters, Iran gains leverage in a broader constellation of pressures and negotiations. For the states that depend on uninterrupted flows of oil and gas, the immediate calculus is pragmatic: how to protect crews, cargoes, and civilian lives without becoming entangled in a larger strategic confrontation. Some choose naval escorts, others diversify routes and suppliers, and many wait for clear state-level direction as governments decide how far they are willing to push in asserting freedom of navigation against an assertive coastal claimant. On the ground in Tehran and the neighboring Gulf capitals, the rhetoric is designed as much for domestic audiences as for foreign ones. Hardline voices use successful intercepts and stern warnings to bolster narratives of resistance and national readiness. Economic costs and political fallout are framed as acceptable or even necessary, given what they describe as external hostility. Conversely, Western leaders emphasize legal norms and the principle that no single power should be allowed to choke global commerce, presenting naval deployments as protective rather than provocative. Amid the noise and the posturing, there are quieter, more consequential actors in the wings: the international organizations, shipping companies, insurers, and the multinational crews who must decide whether a vessel will make the passage or wait for clear signals. Their choices, based on risk, cost, and corporate policy, can determine whether a political dispute remains a diplomatic spat or affects the physical movement of DS in a way that reverberates through economies worldwide. The short-term picture is familiar. A single drone shot down, an official statement, a volley of social media commentary and competing diplomatic cables. But the broader pattern is more worrying. Multiple overlapping flashpoints, airspace incursions, maritime rules, sanctions enforcement, and naval deployments create a compound risk. Each action and reaction narrows the margin for error. So what would meaningful de-escalation look like? At minimum, it would involve clear, verifiable lines of communication between regional states and external navies, transparent procedures for handling suspicious vessels and aircraft, and a willingness from all sides to set immediate tactical advantages aside in favor of steady, multilateral arrangements that keep the strait open. For diplomats, that means opening channels that can absorb shocks before they become crises. For military planners, it means agreeing to common rules of engagement designed to prevent accidents. For economic actors, it means contingency plans that reduce the impact of short-term disruptions. But none of that is simple. Sovereignty, pride, and strategic interests complicate even the most pragmatic proposals. And while external powers can and do offer guarantees of protection, their presence is often portrayed by Tehran as part of the problem rather than the solution. That is the dilemma. Security assurances that reassure some inevitably alarm others. As the sun rose on the day that began with an intercepted drone over Iran's southwest, diplomats and strategists recalculated risk and posture. The sky cleared, at least temporarily, but the political weather remains unsettled. What began as a tactical defense, a radar lock, and an interceptor launch has rippled into questions about legal authority over maritime passage, the possibility of new international resolutions, and the risk that misperception at sea might kindle a wider clash. For now, the MBIQ could be Sessions from Tehran is unmistakable. It will patrol what it calls its sovereign interests and insist on prior coordination for vessels passing through proximate waters. Officials framed yesterday's interception in the new maritime rules as connected elements of a single strategy, a blend of deterrence at sea and assertive diplomacy ashore. For the rest of the world, and for anyone whose business depends on stable, affordable energy, the test is whether cooler heads can translate a tense, highly visible confrontation into durable arrangements that protect commerce and prevent miscalculation. The alternative, a slow ratcheting of measures and countermeasures, each one justified by the last, risks turning a regional contest into a global problem. In the end, the drone that fell in the pre-dawn light was a small object. The consequences that follow legal maneuvers, naval postures, and the fragile calculus of deterrence are anything but small. How leaders choose to follow up now will determine whether the Gulf's waters become a managed flashpoint or a slipping slope into a broader confrontation. The world will be watching, and the next move will matter.